welcome to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the Weekending Show team from Lionheart Radio. Thanks for joining us on a canny wee wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and trees, and it's a chance to hear some great stories from the past and present. In this episode, autumn's well and truly arrived, and Tom Pattinson's enjoying the botanical fireworks and nature's planting time. During these stormy times, Tom Cadwallender's keeping track of the amazing arrivals of seasonal birds, and there are some wonderful surprises to watch out for. Plus some top tips for the garden from Tom P. All coming up on the Nature Garden podcast.
Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline.
The end of October and All Hallows Eve into November brings a change in daylight and warmth, and Tom's here to tell us about the wonderful forces at work as autumn unwraps her amazing gifts in our gardens and countryside.
Hello. I hope, like me, you're enjoying the rapid change in colour of deciduous trees and shrub leaves. I call it nature's fireworks display, but it's far superior to any fireworks that I've seen, and without the associated noise. It's love this way of describing the autumn leaf colour change in deciduous trees and shrubs. It certainly lasts longer than the rockets, bangs and cascades of bonfire night, but there's one thing both these events have in common. They're based on chemical reactions. The natural phenomenon now unfolding in our gardens, parks and countrysides is based on plant survival. Tough leaves of evergreen trees and shrubs can take winter in their stride. Likewise the conifers, the pines with their slim wax-covered needles. But the Achilles heel of deciduous types is their thin, water-rich leaves. These would freeze and expand in the face of frost, destroying cellular tissue and putting the future of the parent plant at risk, so it must shed them to protect itself, but only after reabsorbing those valuable nutrients that they've stored. The catalyst for this scientific process is light and temperature, both of which decrease in intensity as autumn progresses. Chlorophyll, the green colour, masks other leaf pigments. Only as it diminishes and photosynthesis slows down at this time of year are these other pigments revealed. Carotenoids appear as yellow, orange and brown, and they are followed by anthocyanin, which gives the red colour. Anthocyanin has the important task of keeping the nutrient salvage operation from leaf to parent plant flowing before the transporting veins close. This is a race against time, and cells at the base of each stem, where it joins a branch, they're in process of forming a separation layer. When this is completed, the leaves fall. Interestingly, look at the common beech hedge, Fagus sylvatica, in winter. Note that the dead leaves are still clinging to branches and remain so until bud break comes in spring. This is because the separation layer hasn't completely formed. hornbeam is similar in its modus operandi, hangs onto its dead leaves until next spring. They're both classed as deciduous, but they don't actually lose those leaves until next year. The best weather conditions for prolonging our lovely autumn leaf colour spectacle are warm sunny days, followed by cool evenings with an absence of frost. The daytime conditions encourage any remaining leaf chlorophyll to produce sugar, and the presence of anthocyanin ensures its passage into the parent plant. Understanding the basic science behind this process is rather illuminating, and the visual treats currently in our midst, not to mention increasing a sense of awe for the wonder of nature, ought to be enjoyed to the full. So, you should be asking yourself now, I guess, which trees and shrubs are the early stars of this big parade? Well, there's a tree called Cercidifilum japonicum. Some people call it the burnt sugar plant. About 2-3 weeks ago, it was first in line for me. It was displaying sort of smoky pink to yellow leaves, turned from green, of course, to those colours, and they fall very quickly. Now, if you pick up a handful to test the fragrance of those leaves, you'll discover why it's called the burnt sugar tree. Take a big sniff, and it just smells. I like the fragrance of burnt sugar. That's the Cercidifilum. In the garden, I have Bodnintense Dawn Viburnum. The leaves are blazing red now, at this moment. They were green. And the Forsythia, that beautiful spring flower with the yellow flowers, the leaves were green, but now they're turning very pale green into yellow, and there's a touch of red coming into them. So they contain those other leaf colours I was talking about earlier, so we can pinpoint them. Little more of this in a minute.
Easterly winds have been playing havoc in some of our communities as soggy storms hit the country. But the change in the weather signals a peak time for bird watchers. Here's Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology.
I'm sure we all have Storm Babette in our brains, locked in our brains, because that was an amazing storm that came through about 10 days ago, and it brought really very, very strong winds and really a high level of rainfall. But that was kind of like a precursor to the weather patterns we've been having subsequently in the last sort of 10 days or so, and by the look of the weather maps it's going to continue for the next week or so at least. But what's happened is that there's a high pressure been sitting over Scandinavia. It was over the UK, but it's slipped sort of north and east and over Scandinavia, and that's kind of held everything in place. So we've got these low pressures, these wet fronts coming in from the North Atlantic, which are really heavy rain-bearing low pressures. And they're coming in and they're hitting this. So they're travelling in the north and easterly direction as well. So they're coming in, crossing the North Sea, bouncing off this high pressure and circulating around and coming back into the east coast of Britain. And with them, they're bringing massive amount of water and rain and just quite miserable grey days. But actually, ornithologically speaking, it's absolutely fascinating because with those low pressures, we've got easterly winds. And you may remember that I've talked about this previously, that easterly winds in the autumn are quite something in terms of bringing birds in. So there's all these kind of wintering birds that are coming from the northern climes, Scandinavia, Siberia even, points right across to the east, and they're clearing out of that area because the weather during the winter time is really quite bad, and a lot of those birds come across here to spend their winter, not just particularly on the east coast, but they'll come into the UK generally, into Ireland, and work their way into the south and southwest, and perhaps even into northern western Europe if the weather gets at all bad. But these birds, we've got things like fieldfares and redwings and blackbirds and song thrushes and mussel thrushes coming in, and they're coming in massive, huge numbers, and to see them pour out of the sky, because they're all sort of sitting on the other side of the North Sea waiting to cross, because that's what they do, and they're encouraged to cross by the easterly wind, and they get picked up on these fronts, and they're whistled across the North Sea very, very quickly. But they're getting wet, and so they get tired very quickly as well, these birds. So they're making landfall. And to see them sort of coming in off the sea or even just dropping out the sky, and the kind of the phenomenon is known as a fall, which is quite interesting in itself. It kind of really tells you what happens, because these birds are coming in, and as soon as they see land, they drop out the sky. And fieldfares are kind of like, I like the missel thrushes, but they're kind of much prettier, I think, because they've got this nice sort of buffy wash to them down the upper breast, and they've got kind of dark patches on their breasts as well, grey heads and back, but they've got this wonderful chuck, and if you can hear them coming in, and you hear them coming out of the sky, you hear them chatting to each other, and it's absolutely fabulous there. And I'm not just talking about a handful of birds here, I'm talking about 1,000, 2,000, even 3,000. Sometimes they'll carry across in such big flocks. And with them, there'll be redwings. In fact, some of the earlier flocks were entirely redwings. Redwings are about the size of a song thrush, about 6 inches long, nice chestnutty back. But they've got this whacking eye stripe, which a song thrush hasn't got. And as the name suggests, they've got a red underwing, really quite orangey underwing, whereas the song thrush is kind of it's a very, very pale orange underwing, whereas the redwing is really quite bright and strident. And these now are feeding on hawthorn berries. You'll have noticed there's loads of berries in the hedgerows, and they're gorging themselves because they've used a lot of their energy on their journey. But I'm also seeing blackbirds. Our normal blackbird, that population our breeding population has been supplemented by these continental birds. And you can recognise some of the continental birds by the fact that they've got black bills. Some of our resident UK breeding blackbirds, the males particularly, have got quite bright yellow bills, whereas these birds coming from Scandinavia generally have got these black bills, which makes them kind of stand out a little bit. But they're still the same species, just it had to be a different population. So that's kind of, all these birds are piling in, making a big deal of these hedgerow berries that we've got, and some of the fieldfares will be feeding on some of the fallen apples as well, of course. But alongside those thrushes coming in, we also have species like dunnocks and wrens, species which we are very, very familiar with in our gardens and so forth, but they're now piling in, and they're scuttling around all over the place. Also, we have the robins. And you may well be able to pick the robin out, calling behind me. Robins have got such a poignant winter song. It is a lovely song, and they'll chick 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 away. But also they will have this song. But they're quite territorial. These birds have come across, and we tend not to think about robins coming over and as a migrant. We tend to think of them as being resident birds, but actually they're really quite interesting migrants, and they've been coming across in quite big numbers. Next time you go out into the hedgerows, have a look and have a listen, because you'll see them just sitting up on their little perches. The same plumage as what we have. It's the same as the kind of the orange breast and the kind of the chestnutty back, and they're about 5.5 inches long. But they'll sit out perched, and they'll hop out in front of us. They're related to chats. Stone chats and wheatears and things. You can tell that by the way they hop around. They'll drop down in front of you, and they'll just hop away, and they'll kind of just feed in front of you just by hopping like the chats do. So that's something to look out for. But it's interesting that we are seeing all these birds come piling in, because it's a marvellous time of year to see these birds coming in. But also we're seeing one or two rare things which are coming from the north. And the rare things like firecrests. Firecrests, oh wow, what a fabulous little fella that is. It's the same size as our goldcrests. And by the way, goldcrests are piling in as well. And we're seeing, and goldcrests and firecrests are the smallest British birds. They're only about 3.5 inches long. no more than 10 grams in weight. Incredible, really. And I just remember back to some of my early days in migration watching and catching birds on migration to ring them to see what was happening with them. And there was a similar sort of weather pattern back in 1982. And I was at Hawksley Ringing Station. I was kind of running the place in those days. And I remember there was this massive fall, and I was using a mist net. Mist nets are very, very fine mesh nets, and we catch birds as they move through the undergrowth. And they do the birds no harm. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. So we catch them, put rings on so we can actually track them. But anyway, I remember this one occasion where I was standing extracting a goldcrest out of the net, and I just happened to look up, and I could see all these tiny black eyes looking at me, just waiting to jump into the net. It was incredible because they've got the darkest of eyes, these goldcrests. But anyway, back to the story. We're also seeing firecrests. Firecrests are very similar to goldcrests, whereas goldcrests are very greeny on their backs and on their bellies, and they've got this central crown stripe, and they in the males it's orange, in the females it's yellow. If you kind of see the top of them, whereas the firecrest has lovely yellow shoulder patches, but also it has eye stripes and one or two other little adornments on its head, same size. So they're very, very pretty, these things. And sometimes you can hear them just hopping through and moving through, particularly conifer plantations, and they have the tiniest of squeaks, squeak, 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 as they communicate. And they get mixed up into flocks of long-tailed tits as well, and perhaps even chiff-chaffs and one or two other things mixed in with them. But last week we did have one or two kind of really exciting things turn up as well on Holy Island, the Holy Island of Lindisfarne. Now there's a mecca of bird migration. Absolutely amazing that is, and you'll see a lot of bird watchers getting on there during that migration time. And we found an Arctic warbler, as the name suggests, is from the high Arctic, and it breeds in that sort of area, and it's got an eye stripe, and it's extremely rare. Dusky warbler and Rad's warbler. These birds, their names are, you can conjure all sorts of things with them, and it just sort of, the birds of folklore, really. But it's all on the back of kind of the weather patterns, and it's fantastic, really. Autumn, particularly October, is just an amazing time to go bird watching, because you're never sure what's going to happen. And we've got all these easterly winds, and it's going to continue. And I tell you what, man, for an old fella, it just makes me very happy, and I'm still excited as a young bird watcher I used to be. Absolutely brilliant. Go and enjoy it, folks.
The kaleidoscope show of autumn's colourful fireworks is well underway, and the cycle of life continues as the leaves fall, and Tom P is taking advantage of nature's planting time.
So we're enjoying at the moment that leaf colour change in trees and shrubs, not just in our gardens and parks, but throughout the countryside. Take a drive into the countryside and just look at the differences occurring, and those trees that line the road, etc. Really worth looking at. Keep hoping that we have warm days and cool evenings without frost, and it will last much, much longer. What happens to the leaves? Believe it or not, I meet quite a lot of people who grumble about it. A little bit of exercise. Oh, these leaves are a nuisance. I'm forever tidying them up. Well, first and foremost, leave them until they've all fallen, and then have one go at it and clear them up. But for goodness sake, don't throw them away. That's green, red, yellow, brown, gold. In the countryside, they fall in forests and woodlands, they fall to the ground, and over time they decompose and add goodness to the soil. There may not be a lot of food value remaining in the leaves, but my goodness, what a soil conditioner leaf mould is. So collect them, put them on the compost heap, or have a separate bin or area for them. And one of the basic ways of preserving them, leaving them for months on end, it does work actually. Cram them all as tight as you can into a big black bin liner. Tie the top, poke the sides with a garden fork to let some air in, because it's aerobic bacteria which do the good work, not anaerobic. You want some air in there, oxygen, and put it in the quiet part of the garden, and over the months it will decompose in there. But for best results, get them into the compost facility, as many as you can. So the leaves have fallen. It's followed by the big sleep, what I call the big sleep anyway. That is that long period of dormancy, or semi-dormancy, for most of the trees and shrubs. Deciduous types lost their leaves. And that has advantages for us as well. At the moment, we're entering into what is generally called nature's planting time. In the soil, quite a lot of warmth remains, and it's a good chance to introduce new plants in a bare-rooted state. That is, plants which are sold without they've just been healed into the garden, and they're dug up, and there's no ball of soil covering the roots. That will be happening shortly. But in beginning of October, through October, into early November, I like to lift them with as much soil on the roots as possible. But you'll be buying apple trees, all sorts of plants tied in bundles over throughout November, even into December. This period of planting, it continues from now, while the plants are in dormancy, from now well up to the point of next spring, if there's no frost around. And bare-rooted plants generally cost less than those that have been grown in containers. For preference, of course, buy those in containers, which have got a good ball of root around them. It's also a time that we can be moving things around in the garden. I call this not musical chairs, but plant chairs. When the music stops, you stop where you are. You dig a hole first and foremost. It's always wise to have the hole dug and prepared before you plant anything or move anything in the garden. So, for example, I'm going to move an apple tree. It's autumn again. I think some of the plants in this garden keep an eye open for me, and they generally mutter to one another when I'm wandering around with the spade. Keep your heads down, boys and girls. He's going to move one of us, because it can be done. If a plant has outgrown its welcome in one spot, take it to another part of the garden. But first of all, prepare a hole for it. Get some organic matter in there, well rotted. Dig a hole that's a little bit wider and a little bit deeper than the root system you're going to dig up. Dig up the plant that you're going to move and start well away from the roots in sort of a circle around it. Lift it with as much root soil on the ball of root as possible at this time, and don't lift it if it's going to be too heavy. Don't do your back in. Get some sort of material by the side of the hole, ease it onto that material and drag it across to the new planting part. And get that planted. I continue with this process throughout winter, introducing new plants, whether they're bare-rooted or pot-grown. And of course, with the pot-grown plants, make sure they're not root-bound. Tease the roots apart at the bottom if they're going in a circle. And that stimulates the root system. You get a bit of growth with the warmth that remains in the soil during October and November.
As Tom Cadwallender mentioned earlier, some unexpected visitors are landing on the east coast and resting up in our gardens and fields. And the sighting of a particularly colourful crested visitor from Scandinavia and beyond is a cause for real excitement.
It's funny, as a bird watcher, you chat to your bird watching pals and colleagues and acquaintances and so forth, and you talk about all sorts of kind of really rare birds, about how they catch your imagination and so forth. But I tell you, you mention the word or the name waxwing in a group of bird watchers, and they all kind of perk up. Waxwings is not a particularly rare bird, but it's a species which does capture people's imagination. And they really are quite evocative, and I don't know what it is, but they really do. And I think it's possibly because they tend to have kind of eruptions. The population erupts, and they come across and can come across in quite big numbers to winter in the UK. And they feed on berries and, hawthorn berries and rowan berries. And if you notice that, the hedgerows are full of them. But it doesn't happen every winter. And I think that's probably part of the mystery, you know. And it just conjures up a little bit of magic, because the waxwing is quite a beautiful bird. And they have this fabulous little crest, and which actually, when it catches the wind, it just whiffs back and forward. But they have this kind of this pinkish plumage on the entire body. But on the wing feathers, the feathers that are closest to the body, the tertials, they are like dipped in sealing wax, and that's where the name comes from, because they're red and a little bit of yellow in the end of the wing. And they really are so attractive. And they're about sort of just a bit bigger than starlings, so they're about 7 inches long, you know. But they can come in huge numbers. And this last few days, we've been hearing reports up and down the coastline. In fact, I heard one myself, because people have been seeing them, but only fleetingly. And they've been making landfall on the coast. So really, how people pick them up is they have this trilling noise. Trilling noise. That's not very good, by the way. Apologies for my poor impersonation of a waxwing. But they will pick up on the flocks. And there's some early indications that this winter could actually be very, very good, because birds are coming over. And small numbers just yet, but we could be getting a decent bit of a run on here. And you'll often see just people standing around watching, waxwings gorging themselves on rowan berries, particularly these ornamental rowans that are kind of in our housing estates. And I think that's what makes it quite interesting, because they will become kind of part of that urban furniture, if you like, that they kind of will be in a housing estate, for example, feeding on these berries, oblivious to all the other stuff that's going on around them. And they'll just continue to feed and feed and feed until that whole tree has been stripped of berries. Quite something, that. But combined with that whole nature, but they're so kind of pretty as well in terms of in terms of kind of compared to other birds. They really are quite very, very attractive. So yes, it could be a waxwing year, and we can't say that every year because it doesn't happen every year, and that really makes something. So if it is a waxwing year, I shall be reporting back in due course, and fingers crossed that we get some of these birds in, these trillers. Wonderful. Now keep your eye out. Okay.
And to the sound of War Blackbird, here's Tom with some things to be getting on with in the garden.
Well, it's jobs for the week time, and the main growing season is coming to an end, so it's on with the next. Gardening's a year-round pursuit for enthusiasts, never a dull moment. Get wrapped up warmly, get yourself outside when you can, and there are quite a lot of jobs you can be getting on with. At the moment, I have been concentrating a wee bit on what's under the glass in the greenhouse. The main crops have gone. We have some streptocarpus plants which won't survive out there, so we've got to bring them indoors and find a place for them. One of each variety. There are 14 different varieties I have. The beautiful plants during the summer, and just need a bit of protection, a bit of more warmth than the cold greenhouse will provide during the winter. So I'll take some of the leaves off and keep them in a semi-dry state in the garden room in 2 or 3 large trays. There's plenty of room to get them in there. Potatoes, they're growing on. Middle of September, I planted some tubers in pots. Well, actually, mostly in large pots, but one batch, I planted about 5 different tubers into a fertiliser bag which was half filled with compost, and topped it up as we went. And at the moment, I have about 5 or 6 different containers, and they've got beautiful foliage on track for Christmas use. That's Charlotte, the salad potato. Do this every year. They're looking really good at the moment. And in the greenhouse border, I have some lettuce, the leaf lettuce, salad bowl. It was sown at the same time, but I see in some of the local outlets, gardening outlets, they still have some young plants of leaf lettuce. Really worthwhile getting, and they're tough enough to stay in the unheated greenhouse and keep on. We're using them at the moment. Past the micro leaves stage, we're on to slightly bigger leaves now. Keeps it fresh, going all through the winter. And if there's a really severe frost forecast for the potatoes and for the lettuce, I just have some fleece and just drape it lightweight over the top of them until the frost has gone. Some polyanthus we've been looking at outdoors in the garden. There's one called Guinevere, which has got the reddish-purple leaves and beautiful pink flowers with a yellow eye to them. They're not flowering at the moment, but when they finish flowering, we line them out in the garden during the summer, and they're just starting to show new shoots now. So if we bring them into the relative warmth of the cold greenhouse, they'll put some growth on, and we'll have them flowering before we're through winter. And it's quite a nice thing to have to bring indoors 1 or 2 early pots of that. They be potted up shortly, so that's another job to get on with. Out in the veg plot, we've got everlasting spinach there we're harvesting at the moment, and the cabbage and sprouts and leeks. They're all coming online. Trying to keep the birds off those, especially the pigeons, and we have 2 or 3 tame pheasants, mainly the male pheasants, the cock pheasants, coming in. We've been feeding them all year round, really, with grain. Our fault, but they've been showing a bit of interest, along with the pigeons, in the winter greens. So, just covering some of those of our wee bits, so we can get a little bit of a share of the crop as well during winter. So we're trying to balance between the birds, feeding the birds, encouraging them, but making sure they don't get the lion's share of the winter vegetables outdoors, because they're really precious and fresh and tasty. Looking at the fruit, we have Braeburn, a dessert apple to pick. Yet it's still there are two trees of Braeburn. The one that's generally seen in the local grocery store, and they are on good shape, really large fruits on them, but they're just not ready to pick yet, despite the wind and the rain, so we're leaving them where they are. Lord Derby and Bramley's, the 2 good cookers that stay fresh all winter in store, they're just about ready to pick now. And the strawberry beds, we've got to tackle those strawberry beds. Take out the 4-year-old plants, replace them with the new runners that we've been rooting in the garden itself, and keep everything vigorous in there. Weed the strawberry patch as well. Oh, the lawns. Got to get on with those as well. When the rain stops, start cutting them a little bit, not as low as in the summer, but gradually ease off the cutting of those. The hollies are laden with berries. If you want to save some, now's the time to go over and put a little bit of net over 2 or 3 little branches, so you've got some berries of holly for decoration indoors. Otherwise, just leave them to the birds. The main seed orders arrived, so we're storing those in a cool, dark place so that they are ready to go when we get to the turn of the year. Well, nature's planting time is upon us now, so it's time to start propagating the herbaceous perennials, splitting them up, replanting in places, potting some up, etc. And it goes on and on. And the fruit-wise, don't forget those autumn raspberries. They're still fruiting, so we're picking those at the moment. And of course, plant a few bulbs as well. Bulb planting. Hey, there's so much to think about. End of the season, put your tools away. Not in this garden. Whatever you're doing next week, enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to gardener Tom Pattinson and birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology. I'm Carl Steinson, and thanks for listening, and enjoy your gardening and time outdoors with nature. Bye for now.